to talk about it. What are the different data types? So data types can be of primitive and then can be of complex. So what are the primitive data type? Any examples? Integer, character, float, right? Double, Boolean, or string, right? So these are some of the data types, but for simplicity let's use integer, that is one type, float, Boolean, and string. So these are the primitive data types, which talks about that integer can hold a value like something like this, whereas float can handle a value of something like this with decimals. Boolean can have true or false, and a string is definitely anything which should be considered like this. Any questions with the primitive data types? And these you will find in any other programming languages as well. These will remain constant. The only thing is declaration and the syntax will be changed, but fundamentally these are the primitives. In programming, data type is an important concept. To be able to operate on variables, it is important to know what is the type. Without data type, a computer cannot simply work on it. And since JavaScript is using these kind of open pattern, so it is important like how you are using the data type and then in what condition. So for example, if say that variable length equals to 16, so variable name length will have 16 as a value, which is obviously a number. Whereas if we say that our last name is Johnson, so it will implicitly take this as a string, and if it is a complex one, so it will take as object. Now if I say that variable x equals to 16 plus Volvo, what does it mean? Anyone in the group?
String concatenation.
Right. So since we are using this with a string, and it will not be able to add 16 to the Volvo string, so it will take this as a concatenation. Same way, if we use this, now what will happen? Then Booleans are definitely, we're talking about Booleans, it's true and false, and this to derive it, it's quite easier in terms of how to use this. So let's create one example where we should be able to see one of the variable of each type. So for an exercise, I want you guys to define all 3-4 different kind of primitives and then console it on the output. It should be straightforward, right? Just giving you a couple of minutes to do this really quick. When we talk about primitives, so the next version is when we need similar kind of data, and in a block or in a sequential manner, we will define this in array. So for example, this is array of cards, which is of what primitive type?
String.
Right.
String.
This is of a string. And if we need to access any of these variables, I can access it with, for example, if I need to use the first one, so arrays always start with 0th index. So this means it will have the value as this, whereas cards 1 will have the value of Volvo, whereas cars 2 will have the value of BMW. This is simple, right? This is started with 0, 1, 2, and this can go to any length required, right? Then you can access it with the numbers given here. So these numbers can be like defining like this, or this can be dynamic. So I want to give you an exercise where you define this and in console different, maybe 1 or 2 out of this array. So here comes the next one, the type of variable. What I have done, I defined 4 type of variables. One is of definitely array, and then I defined one with a string, one with your number, and one with Boolean. So if I try to check what is the type of each variable, so this is the method type of and then the variable name, then it prints what kind of variable there is. So if we do this and take the output, so output shows like a string, number, and Boolean. A string, number, and Boolean. So is this clear? Any question on it? Okay, now what will happen if we just make this cars as well? What will be the output of cars? Will it tell the array or something else?
Object.
Right, so this will be your object. So anything which is not primitive, it will take that as an object. Now, some of the variables which are just defined, so let's say that variable 4, which are just defined, how these will be categorized as? So this will be called as defined. So nan is when you divide some value with 0. So this is not actually an exception scenario. This is something that we have defined, we have declared, but we have not defined it, what value it will contain. So that's where this will come as undefined. There can be scenario where we want to set some variable with some null values, right? So this is very good exercise to see what kind of data it may present. So if we say var 5 and then semicolon, let's see what type it says. So this is object because it is not primitive. So anything which is not primitive will definitely come as object or undefined. I will not give this as an exercise because this is pretty much straightforward. So I'm assuming like this must be clear, and this is not actually being very frequent used, so that's completely fine. Now first let's understand how to define the function, and then